For many years, the United States has repeated the same message about the Arctic. Washington says the waters cutting through Canada's far north belong to everyone. According to the American position, these are international waters, open to any ship that wants to pass through. But Canada has finally reached a point where it is no longer willing to accept that claim in practice, even if the argument continues on paper. As one Canadian leader recently made clear, sovereignty is not decided by words in treaties or speeches at press conferences. It is decided by who shows up, who patrols the waters, who services the ships, who enforces the rules, and who can actually control what happens in that space. That blunt message was delivered when Canada announced a massive multi-billion-dollar investment in Arctic icebreakers and northern infrastructure. There was no careful diplomatic language and no attempt to soften the statement for American ears. The message was direct. Canada is done allowing other countries to behave as if its Arctic waters are a free-for-all. For decades, the United States moved ships through the Northwest Passage without asking. American submarines surfaced near the North Pole, inside areas Canada considers its own. U.S. vessels flew American flags through Arctic channels and told Ottawa that nothing could be done about it. And for a long time, they were right. Canada had claimed sovereignty over the Northwest Passage for generations, but it lacked the ability to enforce that claim. There were no major ports, no permanent military presence, no year-round icebreaking capacity, and no realistic way to monitor or control traffic. That situation is now changing, and honestly, the shift is happening a lot faster than many people realize. What pushed Canada over the edge was not just climate change or melting ice, it was political pressure from the South. When the United States began threatening Canada economically, slapping tariffs on key industries and, openly talking about using economic force to bend Canada to American interests, something snapped in Ottawa. Instead of backing down, Canada responded by looking north. What leaders saw was not just ice and isolation, but actually, opportunity. A massive trade corridor was slowly opening as Arctic ice retreated, a route that could cut thousands of kilometers off global shipping journeys. A region, rich in minerals the world desperately needs. And a chance for Canada to finally turn long-standing sovereignty claims into real, enforceable control. To understand why this matters so much, you first have to understand what the Northwest Passage actually is. It is not a single straight shipping lane, it is a complex network of channels, straits and waterways weaving through Canada's Arctic islands. For centuries, explorers searched for it and often paid with their lives. Ships were crushed by ice, crews were stranded for years. For most of human history, the passage existed more as a dream than a usable route. That changed because of climate change. Arctic ice is melting faster than scientists once predicted. Areas that were frozen solid for most of the year are now open for longer periods. What was once navigable only in rare conditions is becoming accessible almost every summer. The economic impact of that shift is enormous. A ship traveling between Asia and Europe or the eastern United States can save thousands of kilometers by using Arctic routes instead of going through the Panama Canal or around southern oceans. Shorter distances mean less fuel, fewer days at sea, and faster delivery. In global shipping, time is money, and the Arctic saves both. Even a small share of global trade moving through the Northwest Passage would represent hundreds of billions of dollars. Global maritime trade is worth tens of trillions annually. If just a few % of that traffic flows through Canadian Arctic waters, the value is staggering. But shipping alone is only part of the story. Beneath the Arctic surface lies another prize. Canada's far north holds vast reserves of critical minerals. Nickel, copper, lithium, zinc, rare earth elements, gold, and other resources essential for modern technology are buried under Arctic soil. These materials are crucial for electric vehicles, renewable energy systems, military equipment, and advanced electronics. The problem has never been whether the resources exist. The problem has been access. This is where the sovereignty fight becomes serious. Canada has long argued that the Northwest Passage is part of its internal waters. From Ottawa's perspective, these channels run through Canadian territory, just like rivers or lakes further south. That means foreign ships should need permission to enter and must follow Canadian laws. The United States has never accepted that interpretation. Washington has consistently claimed that the Northwest Passage qualifies as an international strait. Under international law, That would mean any vessel has the right to pass through without asking permission. Canada could regulate safety and environmental standards, but it could not deny access. This disagreement stayed mostly theoretical for decades because the passage wasn't widely usable anyway, but there were moments when it became very real. In the late 1960s, an American oil tanker sailed through the passage without Canadian approval. Canada protested loudly, but could not stop it. Years later, an American icebreaker did the same thing. Again, no permission was requested. The message from Washington was clear. The United States would go where it wanted, regardless of Canada's objections. Eventually, the two countries signed an agreement that papered over the conflict without resolving it. The United States agreed to notify Canada before sending certain vessels, but both sides kept their legal positions. Canada got symbolism. America kept freedom of movement. The underlying problem remained enforcement. For years, Canada's Arctic presence was honestly pretty minimal. Just a few patrols here and there, some seasonal operations. The Coast Guard had limited capability. There were no deep water ports that could operate year-round, and no permanent bases capable of sustained operations. Canada watched all of this with growing concern, but, political will at home was weak. Arctic investments were expensive and, slow to show results. It was easy for governments to promise action and then just delay. But that changed when economic pressure from the United States made reliance on southern trade routes feel risky. When tariffs and threats entered the picture, Canadian leaders realized they needed leverage of their own. They needed new routes, new partners, and new sources of economic strength. The Arctic offered all three. Suddenly, investing in the North was not optional, it was urgent. Canada's response was decisive. Billions of dollars were committed not to studies or speeches, but to physical infrastructure. Ports, roads, surveillance systems, military facilities, and most importantly, new heavy icebreakers. This matters because, physical presence changes everything. Laws mean little without enforcement. When Canada can patrol its waters continuously, escort ships, inspect vessels, and provide essential services, its authority becomes real. Ships that want fuel, repairs, or safe passage have incentives to comply. Over time, routine compliance becomes accepted practice, regardless of what governments argue in legal documents. From Washington's perspective, this creates a dilemma. If the United States insists the passage is international, that argument applies to everyone. China can use it, Russia can use it. Any power can claim the right to operate close to North America's northern approaches. That undermines continental security. But changing position would mean admitting decades of resistance were misguided, and that is politically difficult. At the same time, alliances complicate the situation. Canada and the United States are NATO allies. They share responsibility for defending the continent through NORAD. Yet they disagree fundamentally on who controls one of the most important emerging maritime routes on Earth. NATO itself has avoided taking sides, leaving the issue unresolved at the alliance level. This ambiguity works in Canada's favor. While allies debate, Canada builds. Meanwhile, global rivals are watching closely. Russia has already transformed its Arctic coast into an economic and military corridor. China is investing in icebreaker technology and Arctic research. Both see opportunity in a warming north. By the 2030s, the results of this shift will be visible. Canada will have modern ports capable of handling large ships. Icebreakers will operate year-round. Surveillance and enforcement will be routine. The Northwest Passage will function as a managed corridor rather than an unpoliced shortcut. Economically, Canada stands to gain enormously. Resource exports become viable. Northern communities gain jobs and infrastructure. Shipping services generate revenue. Strategically, Canada gains leverage and credibility. It moves from being a claimant on a map to a controller on the water. The irony is hard to miss. Pressure meant to weaken Canada instead pushed it to strengthen itself. Threats meant to force compliance sparked long-delayed action. What was once neglected became central. What was once symbolic became real. The Arctic is no longer a frozen backwater. It is a frontier of power, trade and security. And Canada has decided it will no longer sit on the sidelines while others define its future. The ice is melting, the passage is opening, and Canada is finally, matching its words with action. What began as a dispute over legal definitions has become a contest of presence and capability. In that contest, ships, ports and patrols matter more than statements, and with every new investment in the North, Canada is making one thing clear to the world: control is not claimed, it is built.